Hi, Zeona. I am very excited to talk to you today. I have read your book. I've been binging your
Aw.
content on Instagram. You are the midterm rental or medium term rental, as you call it, master. And you
Yeah.
actually just wrote your new co-authored book. It's called The 30-Day Stay. They can see it on your screen. This is an investor's guide to mastering the medium term rental. And you co-authored this with Sarah Weaver. I finished reading it. I read it on Audible. I listened to it, and I cannot recommend it enough. You are also, I
Yes.
learned, the co-host of Invest2FI, a podcast about achieving financial independence through investing in real estate with Craig Kurlop, correct?
Yeah.
I actually read his house hacking book, I believe about a year ago. So that's awesome. And I do want to go ahead and before I ask you any questions, just let you know about how I learned about you because I think it's very
Yeah.
interesting. So
Oh boy.
it's interesting to me. So I
hmm
actually listening to this podcast. It's called Wire. It's by Amelia and Grace. And I
Yeah.
remember because I currently have a short-term rental and I'm thinking of transitioning into midterm rental. So I listened to their podcast and they mentioned you. And all I remember was your name was cool. Like that's what like attracted me. I was like, oh, that's a unique name. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like it was notable. And then I kid you not, maybe like around a couple of weeks later, I'm still in contact with the realtor that helped us buy our out-of-state property. His name's Ruben Galindo. I believe you have met him. He's based in San
Yeah.
Antonio. And he called me because we're still in contact and he said, hey, Ellie, I'm going to the Bigger Pockets conference in San Diego. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, Ruben. Have fun. We talk after the event. He says he met you. He says, I believe you gave him a signed copy of your book. And I was like, this is the second time I hear her name. And now here we are. So
I
I do
love it.
want to really get into your journey. You went from $5,000 in debt to being financially free within 2 years with Airbnb. So can
So it
you
was actually $50,000 in debt because it was student loan debt. Yeah.
That's what I meant to say, but me and numbers are
It's all
sometimes
good.
yeah. But anyway, $50,000 in debt, 2 years financially free with Airbnb. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how it led into your journey within real estate?
Yeah. So I kind of got into real estate accidentally. I mean, I'd always loved homes, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but my mom was always moving our furniture around. We'd come home from school and it'd be all different. And so, yeah, I really had like this interest in design and interest in homes for a long time, but we never owned anything when I was growing up. And so I just kind of thought that we couldn't. I just thought that it was going to be too expensive and we could never imagine doing that.
Yeah.
So when I got into Airbnb, I heard about it from a friend of mine who was living in New York City in 2011. So quite a long time ago. And he was renting out an apartment in New York City, which is very expensive. And he got laid off from his job. And so he said, I've heard about this Airbnb thing. I think I'm going to rent my apartment and go travel because I'm totally burnt out. And after a year, he made $50,000 on that apartment that he didn't own. And I thought, gosh, that's a lot of money. At that time, it was like a tech salary, it's kind of like $100,000. And so for me, I thought, well, I could just give it a try. Let's just see. So the way I started was in a 2-bedroom apartment that I was renting. And I had a roommate, and my roommate ended up moving out. And so I had her room already furnished. And I thought, it's not going to be that hard. I'll just put it up on Airbnb. And if it doesn't work, I'll just get another roommate. And it ended up working out really well. So from there, I got more apartments. Then I could buy an apartment. Then I bought out of state. And so it's kind of just rolled from there.
Yeah, I feel like in your story, like that you shared right now, also in your book, a lot of things stood out and there was like similarities there because you mentioned the fact that you would come home from school and your mom had like rearranged the furniture. And I think that's something that I definitely experienced too from like a very young age, not every Saturday, but maybe every month. Once my
Yeah.
mom was blasting music, I already knew her CDs. I already knew the cleaning mix. And she would just spend the whole day rearranging. And I actually really enjoyed that. So when I furnished my first short-term rental, it's interesting how we have these interests that come from childhood or from an early age that later in life
Yeah.
we're able to kind of like tie it back full circle. So yeah, that's interesting how something you were able to draw that connection, right? You were able to draw that connection. But yeah, so I did also start with Airbnb first. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that your friend in New York City, you know, you saw that he mentioned to you that he was making just a lot of income that he probably would not have been able to make with like a long-term rental, right? Because it's New York.
Mhm.
And the fact that you were able to, he planted a seed, right? And the fact that you were able
Yeah.
to like take that and make something with that, I feel like that's definitely exceptional. But I like in my channel, I focus a lot on it's just capturing my journey. I focus a lot on
Yeah.
mindset, and that's something about you that stood out to me. And I will say that this is something that sticks out to me from a lot of real estate investors. Like a lot of times people think, oh, people from outside that have no interest in investing, they could see investors as greedy or like, the investors have been called so many things. But in my experience, I have not found that. I have found people that just try to improve every day. They benefit from the deals, but they're helping so many people along the way,
Yeah.
such as yourself through education. So I think that mindset piece, like, really is what is exceptional about you because I feel like I said on my channel, I don't have like any specific focus. I think for me, the overarching theme is just improve 1% every day and see if you can impact people along the way. That's even better, right? Because we are not alone. Like we are all connected, and what we do can
Yeah.
negatively influence someone or it can positively influence someone. So I feel for you, like the motivation has to be, which and it is more than money. It's not only about money. So can you share a little bit about your emotional why or your motive or perhaps your biggest inspirations to pursue this journey that you're on?
Yeah, you know why I think changes so much. Like at first for me, I just wanted the freedom. I wanted to have space and time. And then I wanted to create something later. And creating a business and building something just to see if you can is a really exciting pursuit. And then after that, I was like losing steam in that. And I wanted to help people and I wanted to just get that kind of inspiration from helping other people and hearing how their lives have changed because, oh, they read something I did or they saw a video of something I did. And so that is super rewarding too. But currently, I think, I wrote a book because I thought maybe I couldn't, it's like one of those things that I didn't know it was a dream, and now that I've done it, it's made me really, really busy. And I think that I want to, after this kind of settles down, really go back and reclaim my time and just spend time on myself, improving myself. So it's kind of like the ebb and flow. It's like you come out and you want to do everything, and then you go back and you want to like process everything that you did,
Yeah,
right?
definitely, definitely. And you have
Yeah.
that incubation period. But I definitely think that's interesting. So you're saying that your why it changes as you progress because you change as you progress. And perhaps like
Yeah.
things that used to stop you, like the limiting beliefs or whatever those mental blocks were, they change as you go through your entrepreneurial journey, which is what real estate investing is, right? Any business
Yeah.
is. So you're saying that it has just pivoted. And I think that's very important because a lot of times we get stuck on, I feel like that allows you to be more flexible in your strategy, right? Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes, I know this happened to me when I first started investing in real estate. I mean, I'm a very small investor, which is, I think, a voice that is also important for
Yeah.
your listeners to hear, because which is why I was interested in talking to you, because I knew this would be an inspirational conversation for me. Because I feel like a lot of times we get so stuck on one strategy. And it wasn't until I started talking to people like you. I met Ruben Galindo through like a mastermind. It was a Rat Race to Fi mastermind that I was part of, and just
I
met
love
so
that.
many people that provide a different perspective and allow you to pivot and change your strategy. And I do feel like having that motivation, that overarching motivation, you need it. It's necessary because I'm sure you probably have encountered your fair share of challenges, and there's no way to survive certain type of challenges without that like motive to keep pushing, to keep going. So the fact that your motive is us, right? Like it's a lot of us that you perhaps don't even know we exist, but you are indirectly impacting us. And that's called impact, and that's called a legacy. So I commend you for that. And
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, so I know your book is a blueprint for launching and maintaining a medium-term rental business. Why do you think specifically midterm rentals are a powerful opportunity for investors that are interested in maybe pivoting in the market?
Yeah, so this is just kind of a space that's gotten really popular recently. And I think there's a lot more upside than many of us realize. And so there's kind of like the basic way to do the MTR, which we talk about a lot in the book, right? Where you can just have your MTRs full from Airbnb and Furnish Finder alone, like just those two websites. And if you wanted to just do that, that would be enough. But now I'm learning so much more about corporate housing and nurse contracts and insurance, government contracts. And those places you can charge 3-4 times market rate, which is absolutely crazy. You know, it just kind of like blows your mind how much money you can make. So you can definitely charge more than a short-term rental. And I think people have thought up until now that a medium-term rental or mid-term rental is going to be less. So why I think it's so powerful is that you can have less properties and you can make more. And so you don't have to be one of those investors that has to pursue 100 doors if you don't want to, right? And so I really like the idea of a small but mighty portfolio that's like really giving you a lot, but it's very manageable so that you can have less and you can do it really well.
Yeah, because I know too with short-term rentals, I know I'm experiencing this with like just regulations and tax. Like I know this varies from city to city, but we pay city tax, county tax, state tax. We're out
It's
of
a
state.
lot.
We're out of state investors, so we pay two states. It's tax in two states. So also like what's happening in San Antonio, for example, is there are regulations, like you require a permit. There are city ordinances in place, but they're not enforced. So what's happening, or they could be enforced better, I should say. So what's happening, there's a lot of, Airbnb hosts. So there's people that have their listings without a permit that obviously is going to pull competition from people that do have permits and pay taxes. So I
Yeah.
know just like being part of San Antonio Facebook groups for Airbnb, so many people have sold in this city, and I'm sure in other cities because of various reasons. But I think because of that is why I'm pivoting. And you mentioned contracts. So how do you go about getting into contact with some of these agencies or companies that you mentioned?
Yeah. So there's a few different ways. There's a couple of websites that are more for corporate housing. So getting listed on those websites can help. And even listing on Zillow is a good place to go. But you don't want to list on Zillow at the price that you would on Furnish Finder. Furnish Finder is kind of a discount area. And I've looked around in San Antonio for Furnish Finder, and they don't charge that much. It's like listed a little too cheap. So, I mean, you can be on Furnish Finder if you like and just see if people will pay the price that you want. But what I would aim for is trying to be more at that Airbnb price. And so if you go somewhere like AirDNA and then you figure out what your comps are there, I don't know if you know how to do that, but you can look at what it projects you can make in a year and then use that divided by 12 and figure out what you should be making every month. I would be listing around that and trying to beat that, trying to go higher. So on the contract sites, you can list on Zillow. That's one of them, actually. And so you don't want to list on Zillow at a cheap price. You want to list at a high price. And then that will weed out a lot of the people that won't reach out to you. It'll end up being more of the contracts. And then there's a few other sites. There's different ones, like ALE Solutions is one. But if you reach out to me, I'm happy to give you a list. We use like 6 different sites, maybe 5 different sites outside of Airbnb and Furnish Finder. Other ways people do it, they can reach out to the hospitals, like the HR departments, And when you're doing that, though, you've got to build relationships. So you're trying to find the actual recruiters and the agencies that are doing the placements. And it can be a lot of work, and it can be a little bit difficult to figure out. So what we're trying right now is just listing on these few sites and seeing if we can get bites that way through the insurance companies. Yeah. So still learning. It's a new industry, and we're all kind of growing.
Yeah. I know I was watching some YouTube videos, and some of the like main YouTubers within this realm, they recommended insurance companies, relocation companies. So I did try that. I actually was able to get on the phone with someone, very good customer service. I believe it was ALE Solutions. So yeah, they did tell me to be patient, but it's good to like, validation that you yourself have, done that.
Yeah.
So in terms of like launching and sustaining a real midterm rental, what does that look like in terms of your monthly expenses? What is required to have like a functional rental, and what do you have to pay for as a landlord?
Yeah, so it doesn't cost us much. I mean, if you're paying for a website, so like Furnish Finder, you have to pay, I think it's a little over 100 a year, maybe it's 120 or something. That's not that much. In most of the websites, they charge you based on when you actually get a booking. So that part's pretty easy. What we pay for is utilities. So you've got a budget for that. And obviously furniture if you haven't furnished your unit. But other than that, it's just you can keep them rented by Airbnb and Furnish Finder alone, or you can wait and get some great contracts. But it doesn't really cost us anything to do that process.
I think I was talking more in terms of you probably have to pay for utilities, correct? So is it traditional that all utilities are paid for with the midterm rental? Are there like some utilities that you pay for, you can ask the renter to pay the rest, or what does that look like for you? Or what do you recommend?
Yeah, so I recommend covering them all. The only thing that we don't do is we don't have like cable TV, but we always have Netflix or something for streaming.
Gotcha. Okay, so and I know in like for example, HVAC expenses can be high depending on, certain areas that you live in that maybe require the heater to be on all through winter, or San Antonio gets very humid, for example. So I know that like that HVAC, the AC has to be running almost all day. So I that can like those costs can rack up. So what do you suggest in terms of maybe like diminishing those costs, reducing those costs, or is there at a point where you hand off like the
Some of
expense
that expense.
onto
Yeah, I mean, I don't. What you can do is have a smart thermostat, so something like a Nest, where you're keeping control over what the temperature is, and they can reach out to you if they need you to change it. But basically, you don't want people to set your thermostat under 68. So if they go too cold, they can actually freeze your pipes with the AC. And then that's actually pretty expensive. And that's definitely happened to us before. And so depending on how old your home is, maybe it's not as efficient. And so people try to make it like 60 degrees in the house, and that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's good to have a little bit of control and visibility over that. Some people, they'll call the like utility companies and figure out the history of what the home has costed for the different utilities before they buy. And then they factor that in. So for me, I just kind of use a certain estimate. Usually a single family home is going to be around $500 a month, sometimes less, sometimes a little more, but that's usually what it is. And that's including lawn care and snow removal if you have to do that in the winter. So we try to kind of have a certain budget. But if you do find that someone's being super excessive, you can say, hey, I cover $300, but if you go over that, that's going to be you.
Gotcha.
It's just more complicated.
Yeah. And that's something you would have to include in the lease, right? You just like break it down in the lease. Okay. Just wanted to, I know a lot of times I get questioned as to, oh, like, do we have to provide all utilities? So I think it's good to hear yes, but if you feel if it gets to a point where maybe that get energy bill is too high, there are ways of, for the next tenant, maybe structuring it in a way that doesn't eat too much into your cash flow. So I learned a lot from your book. So just so listeners know, like your book talks about understanding the midterm rental strategy, how to acquire properties, so the acquisition process, how to build your team, how to list your property effectively, and as well as how to carry out responsible landlording. So I definitely recommend to anyone listening to definitely purchase the book and learn more in depth about each of these categories. Something that I do want to ask you and focus a little bit more on, because I do believe this is like a very crucial part, is building your team, right? I know that this
Yeah.
is particularly difficult because it's hard to find someone you trust, perhaps to trust that they're going to take care of the property as close as you would take care of the property. So who do you consider integral members of your team and how do you find them?
Yeah. So, I mean, working with someone like Ruben is probably super helpful because if you've got an investor friendly agent, usually they're investing themselves.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I look for is that when I'm going to refer somebody to a different team, I'm like, do you own or operate medium term or short term rentals? Because I want to know that they know the pockets, they know the legality, you know, they just know how they work. And a lot of times, if you start with that investor friendly agent, they'll give you the rest of the people, right? They'll have a cleaner already because they're working with cleaners. They'll have handymen for you. So it's really easy to go from there. But I do think that just with a cleaner and a handyman, you can start. And then from there, you know, maybe you need to expand and maybe you need to get lawn care eventually. And maybe you get a specialty plumber or something like that. But you don't need a huge team to get started unless you're doing construction.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like your cleaner is for sure the
Everything.
main component of your team. How do you,
Yeah.
what has been your experience or your team's experience in like making sure that the cleaner is also, you know, not taking advantage or I mean, I've had the experience of both, like having great cleaners, but then also having cleaners that after a while, you know, maybe the quality in cleaning starts decreasing. So do you have like an additional person that maybe can once in a while oversee the inventory or just like another impartial person that can keep eyes on your property?
Yeah, you know, I've heard of people doing like a quality control check where they have the cleaner go, but then they have another person on their staff that checks all the places after they've been cleaned. I've never done that, but I mean, I think it could be really valuable. I think it really just depends on how many places you have, if you're managing for other people, all of that. Because what I've found is basically my cleaner will tell on my tenants, right? She'll be like, oh my gosh, these tenants were terrible or these ones were great. And then my tenant will tell on my cleaner. So it's like, if this cleaner, you know, didn't do a good job, I'm going to hear from it from the tenant. And usually I don't hear anything. So I feel great. But if you do hear something negative, then you do take it back to them and kind of go like, hey, we need to have a talk about how this is going. Um, yeah, that's worked out well enough for me so far.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience as well. I do feel, do you have like a threshold, like a cutoff? Because I know like someone like me, it's just, I'm not confrontational. So I know there's
Yeah.
times where like I've heard of the term, you hire slow, fire quickly. But I
Yeah.
know like also becoming an entrepreneur, like you learn how to become a business person at different steps of the way. And for certain
Yeah.
personality types, it might be easier to be that person. I have found that it's hard for me to remove like the emotion sometimes from business, which some can see it as a good thing, some can see it as a negative. But do you have
Yeah.
your general threshold where, you know, you sort of draw the line if you feel like it's not being beneficial for your business anymore?
Yeah. Gosh, that's so interesting. We haven't really had trouble in a while, but I have had cleaners in the past where you get a few bad reviews and then you've got to say like, hey, this is just not working. So I've definitely let people go over time. I think when you find somebody great, you really need to pay them like a good wage and you need to be staying in communication with them so that they're happy because there aren't that many great cleaners out there. You know, it's not like a job that a lot of people aspire to do. And so when you find someone great, it's like make sure to keep them.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel
Yeah.
like drawing that line between, you're friendly and you treat people with respect, but at the same time, knowing where to draw the line. And I'm saying this mainly to
Yeah.
myself, but if there's
Yeah.
anyone else listening that, is also a beginner in any type of business, is just sort of developing that like backbone, that spine in business can be hard for like some personality types over another. So, um,
Yeah.
it's definitely important to remember at the end of the day, it's a business. And, if someone's doing right by you, like treat them well. But at one point you need to look out for you and for your business, right?
Yeah, totally.
In terms of finding tenants, I know you spoke a little bit about this as to like some of the avenues, some of the places to list your property. But so I'm currently listed on Airbnb, on Furnished Finder. I did recently put my property on Zillow. Do you have any tips for finding a tenant and like properly vetting tenants?
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends where they come from. If they come from Furnish Finder and they're already nurses, then you could ask just for their employment history or not their employment history, but their proof of employment, because nurses are highly background checked. So you don't necessarily need to go through that process with them. But it is important to background check people that are coming from somewhere else. So Airbnb, I don't do it, but if it's like Zillow or just somewhere random, then I would. When you're doing corporate housing like ALE Solutions, that might end up being an actual company. So the insurance company would give you the contract instead of the person. So you don't need to do a background check with the insurance company, So it kind of depends on where they're coming from. But it's always good to do that background check, which is going to include evictions. You never want to accept anybody who's been evicted ever. It's going to have their credit report. So usually I like to be like 650 and higher on their credit score. And then it will have criminal report. And so I am really careful about that. Like if somebody has some kind of misdemeanor, it's probably okay. But if they've done any violent crimes, I don't want that.
Yeah,
Right. So you want to kind of be careful there.
yeah, definitely. Have you ever had any problems with having to evict a tenant? Because I know a lot of times you hear it's not a matter of if it'll happen, it's a matter of when. So have you experienced like an eviction yet?
I haven't. And I've been doing this over 10 years, right? So it doesn't have to happen, but I have had a bad experience with a tenant. And so what happened for me is that when COVID happened, there was a period there that I felt kind of unsure, almost like desperate of going, I just need to get someone in so we can like ride it out for a little while. Right. And so I think when you get into those places of being desperate, sometimes you skip steps. And it's really important to stay strong with your criteria. Right. So this was a point where I got someone off Craigslist and I don't really remember, but I don't think I background checked them. And I kind of just went off of whatever the lady was telling me. And so it just didn't end up being a good fit. And she very quickly ended up leaving and she left me with her ex-husband in the house who I'd never spoken to. And he ended up being like a druggie and had pets and it was just a big mess. So our place got pretty destroyed in that situation. So I didn't have to evict him. He left on his own, but it costs us a lot of money. And so that's a good lesson for me to be like, oh, I need to be, more strong with my boundaries and my criteria.
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
feel that a lot of times you hear that, like I've read that in books, like don't like definitely do a thorough vetting process, call their previous landlords. And it's
Yeah.
just one of those things too, like when you do get into those moments that you're describing, like I feel like we've all been there. I mean, even right now, like obviously COVID, but then the economy like with increasing market rates, and sometimes people travel less depending on your market. So I feel like it does place investors or landlords in very tricky situations where you don't want to be guided by the dollar sign, but sometimes you need to, well, you always every month need to pay your mortgage and you have expenses. So I feel like it's definitely one of those things that I guess just sort of like power through that and making sure you have all your ducks in a row, and like you, especially with the tenant, make sure you're properly vetting them, especially in areas that have more like tenant friendly laws, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Can you tell us a little bit about your portfolio? I know that you have 12 units, correct, over four
Hmm.
different states. I know that was as of
Yes.
July. So I don't know if you've added any or sold any, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's still the same. I'm looking to sell a couple places. I think what my strategy is now is that I want to have more places in one area, and I want to become known in that area through different recruiters and agencies that like I'm the person who can help them. Right. So when I got started with short-term rentals, it didn't really matter. It's
Mhm.
not like I needed to have a lot in the same town. So I ended up just going wherever I found an opportunity. And now I'm like, oh, okay. I need to bring them back together. So it's not a very quick process. I'm not just going to sell all my properties and start fresh. But as I am looking to buy, I'm kind of looking more in my local area in Colorado. So yeah, I mean, it's great. I love having such a like vast portfolio.
Yeah. So do you think that like initially when you started exploring other markets, was it because, maybe your realtor or people in your network would funnel leads and you saw that it was a good deal, would jump on it, or why in particular um those states? You haven't mentioned the
Yeah.
state, but it's Colorado, Washington, Florida, and Missouri. Was it Missouri?
Yeah,
Missouri.
Missouri. So it was accidental for me. When I started in Colorado, I couldn't really afford Colorado. It was really expensive. So I got one place and then I was like, I got to go somewhere else. And then I heard about St. Louis through a friend and kind of ended up going just because of a wedding. And that led into me buying four places in that town because I found, wow, I can buy places for under 100,000. That just was more easy to get into for me.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it just kept happening where it's like, I would speak to different investors and I'd get ideas of different markets and I'd be running numbers and then I'd end up over there. So I've done a lot of that, but now I'm still hearing those stories, but trying to be a little more selective. And I think Colorado, I feel like it's going to appreciate over the years a lot faster than other markets. There's just a lot of demand, a lot of people moving here. So even though it's an expensive start, I feel like there's a lot of room for growth. And so, yeah, it's easy to have them in my backyard.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's important to like remember, like for any investor, whether you're starting off or like later in your journey, is like it has to make sense for you and your goals, right? I know something, I
Yeah.
don't know if I can't remember exactly if it was something you mentioned or Sarah in the book, or maybe both of you, but it's when you're scattered, when you're like trying to pursue a lot of strategies, it's you don't have the focus, you don't have that one thing that you can
Yeah.
funnel your energy into. So it's interesting though, because you're saying you want to invest in Colorado and you want to keep your properties in one space, and that's the market you choose. Whereas somewhere else, you're going to hear an investor saying Colorado is not a good investment. And
Yeah.
what happens, especially like I know this happened to me when I was like learning about real estate, is you just get obviously like the analysis paralysis because you're incubating, right? You're taking all this information, you're hearing about X investor, Y investor, like all these different investors, everyone's doing something different. And at the end of the day, it has to make sense to you, to your goals, to where you're at, to where you see yourself headed. And I know like
Yeah.
that was a big lesson that I had to learn, because when we were trying to buy initially, my husband and I live in Southern California. I live in the greater
Mm.
Los Angeles area. It's
Yeah.
expensive. It's
Totally.
so we still are small fish with like big sharks swimming in like this. Back in the day, it seemed like it was a very competitive, it's still competitive, but back then when like interest rates were super low and people were putting 100K over asking, there's just no way that we could compete.
Yeah.
And that was when we said, okay, you know what, where are we even at right now? Like, are we going to buy a house to buy a house? Like, no, like let's plan our at least the next 5 years, or generally, and where are we at right now though? And that's when I met Ruben and I pivoted, because all the investors that lived in California were investing out of state, like various like states throughout the US. So I pivoted upon learning, but only after analyzing where we were at and selecting our criteria, which you also talk about in the book. And
Yeah.
just focusing on that and knowing that it's going to happen, like, because like, and making sure the numbers make sense. So that was a big takeaway for me. It's just like reminder, because now we're back in that space where we have like the funds for a down payment, but it's in California where we're at, prices haven't dropped that much. So the mortgage is still really high. And so
Yeah.
it still has to make sense, right? But it's just
True.
remembering your why. And even if it doesn't make sense to someone else, as long as it makes sense to you. And that's what I'm hearing about you throughout your journey.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we all have different goals. So we're all going to look in different markets for different reasons. So it's not really something that you can follow somebody else and just copy them. You really have to figure out your strategy and your needs first, and
Yeah.
then align with whatever place that is.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I guess for me, when I was, I currently don't have like a personal Instagram. I actually just made one last night to follow you. But back in the day when I was like on Instagram, like my own personal Instagram, I remember just being super saturated by like all the different possibilities. And it's just important to like draw that line for yourself. And and so the fact that you've done that throughout your real estate journey, I think is a main reason why you also have been very successful. I do have a question. In the book you mentioned a couple of challenges that you've experienced in your journey, but what would you say
Yeah.
is like the biggest challenge that stands out to you, like that you had to overcome?
Well, I think recently it's been around just keeping focused. I think there's so much out there. So I think for a young investor, it would probably be the analysis paralysis. But for me, it's that I am pulled all these different directions. You know, people want to do one-on-one time with me. They want to have me post on social media and they want me to be on, Facebook groups or whatever. There's just all these places that I can be. And I have to remember like, you only have so much energy and so much time in the day. And like, what are your goals? You always have to go back to that and not get distracted. So I think now in this age of like so much information, like you're saying, Instagram wasn't a tool for you. It actually ended up being a time suck because you just got confused and lost. So I'd say sometimes when you're feeling lost, go back to what your goals are and figure out what you need to do to get those goals achieved and not listen to all the noise.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like knowledge is obviously important. It's a tool, but at one point, if there is no action taken on that knowledge, then it's more of a distraction. And I feel like, at least for me, like that was the case. And two, it's a mindset game. Like you have to get your mindset to the point where you can be exposed to all this oversaturation, but still be centered in what you want. And I feel like at the time, I wasn't centered in what I wanted, so I was just getting, like oversaturated. But it's interesting because once
Yeah.
I put that out and I just like incubated, but like rather than a bunch of external information, it's like, okay, trust that you have the information that you need. And if you don't, you're going to figure it out. Because I know when we launched our Airbnb, it was similar to your story in the sense of we had a friend that had just taken an Airbnb course. I believe the instructor's name is Jorge Contreras. He's also based here in Southern California, and he did the strategy that you talked about, rental arbitrage in
Yeah.
Los Angeles, and it was very successful. I think now he has 4 Airbnbs, 3 are in LA, and then one is in San Bernardino County, and which is east of the LA city.
Yeah.
I remember like we had just closed on our property. He said we were gonna rent it as a long term, and he just planted that seed. He just said, "Oh, like why don't you try Airbnb?" And I said, "I don't know much." He's like, "Wait, but you've read books. Like you're well versed in real estate enough to go after it." And it just like stuck with me. He didn't have to say much more. It was just sort of like the wheels
Yeah.
started turning, and that seed was planted. But it was up to me to like let it blossom and do something out of it. And a lot of
Yeah.
times, like what I learned, because I ended up taking the same course he did by the instructor Jorge Contreras. And something that he says is done is better than perfect. And
Yeah.
there's so many things that are going to come up in your journey, like throughout real estate, that cannot even foresee. You can't anticipate. I probably had read about it, but forgot about all of the things that I read, because it's not until it's there in your face and you have to deal with it that you figure it out. Right. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely important to connect yourself too with people that are in this journey, and like your network is your net worth, right? Like that's also something you mentioned in the book. So I definitely have found that to be the case as well.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone that wants to start on their real estate journey, or maybe, continue growing their portfolio? What do you recommend the first steps or the next steps for those individuals that maybe feel fearful in this market, or when you're in that space, it's just very difficult to see beyond your situation? So what would you say to someone that is in that circumstance?
Yeah, I think for those people, it's really important to find community, and that can be local. You can go to meetups and meet people. It can also be online. There's a lot of different groups, like Facebook has a lot of groups. And just talking to different people that are doing different strategies, or they're investing in different markets. And so you can get a feel for what's possible, because there are markets out there where you can still do long term. There's not that many, but you can. And there's markets that are really affordable. There's places where you can buy a home for $100,000. And that's really hard to imagine if you're coming from LA or from my market, but it exists. And so I think it's just kind of like expanding a little and understanding what's out there, and also getting around people where that's normal. Because if you're coming from just hearing about real estate and like you've never done it and nobody you know's done it, it's going to sound crazy, right? It's going to sound super dangerous. And so you need to be around people and have friends that are doing it. That will help you a lot.
Yeah, 100%. It's like finding your tribe, right? Like that whole concept of
Yeah.
finding your tribe, finding people that are doing better than you, people that can be your mentors, either directly or indirectly, and just
Yeah.
being around people that are having those conversations, because it's interesting how much faster that will propel you toward your goal. And it's something that you hear often, because it's true, and I know that definitely happened to me. I know at the time when I decided to join the Rat Race to FI mastermind back in 2021, I believe it like early 2020, late 2020, early 2021. I had just left my PhD program. It was like I was in the midst of a complete career change. So I left for various reasons. And then I was working in a job that I didn't love. There was nothing wrong with the people or the position. It's just kind of like you talked about in your book, when you went off to, or after you left your interior design career, you had already started listening to books with your mom, right? Like you guys were kind of nerding out about that. And you had these concepts that are just sort of like in the back of your mind somewhere. So then it never leaves. It never leaves you. And then I know for me, I was in this space where I was unhappy, and I was just, sometimes you hit a moment where your life isn't what you pictured it would be at that particular moment.
Oh, sure.
So I feel that for me, it was just, you know what, I'm going to invest in this mastermind. And that was the year that I was able to make a lot happen, when I, like grew that network and I understood the power of it. But you really have to place yourself in that situation and invest. It's not an expense, it's an investment, because it's your growth and it's you creating that community for yourself. Because at the end of the day, like this is something that I really like about what I heard from your story. You've experienced a lot of hardships, from losing your mother to having a career change to partnerships gone wrong, which it could just be a sentence in the book, but like that betrayal, like it takes time to recover from it and to like trust people again. But you are, I just, the way you speak, I know that you believe you're the creator of your own reality, and it's so powerful to take that ownership. And you're unstoppable when you do, because you're in control of your life, and whatever you can't control, you're not going to worry about it because you can't control it. So I definitely like I really recommend for people to purchase your book. And I know for myself, I have been following you on your journey ever since I've heard multiple times about you. And yeah, I just really want to thank you for just being this source of inspiration for myself, but also for, sticking through with your dream, because that has created legacy and you're creating impact. So yeah, I do want
Thank
to
you.
go ahead and ask you, what can anyone watching do for you? Like where can we find you? Where can we follow you? Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah. So I have a website, ZeonaMcIntyre.com. So most things are there. But I'm on Instagram a lot. So that one's like the easiest place. If you just want to DM me there, I answer all my DMs. So that is Zeona McIntyre again. Try to keep it the same everywhere. But I don't know what people can do for me. I mean, I love hearing that. It's so great. Yeah, I mean, I'd say share the book. If it's something that you find valuable personally, like, if there's value in it, if there's inspiration in it, share it with other people, because that's like the easiest way for us to get the information out to a lot of people.
Definitely. Yeah. And I will also go ahead and link everything for people to have accessible and find you just much quicker. But I do want to ask you one last question, actually.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you are busy right now, right? You have this book that has just been published with Bigger Pockets this month. And there's just a lot of things, you wear a lot of hats and you are busy, and you want to take some time to maybe retract from that after a while and just incubate, process everything. But what else is in store for you? What are you, in regards to real estate or any personal shares, really? What is next for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I don't know, I'm kind of in a weird spot of wanting to do like a little bit less. So we'll see exactly where that leads. I've been dreaming about a TV show. I think that would be like a really interesting thing. It's like just kind of those stretch goals of like, could I ever write a book? Could I have a show? Like that stuff feels really exciting and interesting. But I mostly sell real estate and I mostly buy real estate. And those are the avenues I want to kind of stay in. So all the other stuff is a little bit extra. And I'm just trying to figure out what are the things that bring me the most joy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an
Yeah.
important question to definitely ask yourself. But
Yeah.
Ziana, thank you so much for your time. This has been a
Thanks.
great pleasure. Like I said, it was your name that first stood out to me, and then I heard great things about you from multiple sources. And then here we were in a conversation, and I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're busy, but here you are with me on
Thanks.
this Monday morning. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I will go ahead and, as I mentioned, link everything so people can access. And I hope that we will stay in touch and have another conversation in the near future.
Thanks.
Bye, Ziana.
Bye.